That was pretty smooth, wasn't it? A little bit rocky perhaps, but it is only got 3 wheels. A little top heavy. Welcome folks, this is the Meccano Maker System Tactical Copter build, as you can see, completed. Bit of an unusual one, this one. Still not quite sure if I think it's decent value for money. I'm leaning towards that it's not quite. It's a bit weird because, as you can see, the majority of parts are the 1/4 inch hole spaced parts, and they're lighter. Overall, though, not a bad build really. Certainly a little fiddly in places, and some of the instructions don't help. But overall, the finished article I think looks pretty good. So then folks, what have we got with this build? Well, as you can see, I think you'll probably agree it's quite a nice model, an impressive sort of size, not massive but not tiny by any means. Let's give you an idea of the size, even though it's upside down. Length of the actual helicopter itself is around 11 inches. Blades obviously, well, probably about the same. The blades are made up of 2 5.5 inch strips with a bit in the middle, so about the same. Width wise, we have about 6 inch, and height from the bottom to the top of the blades is a shade under 5 inch. So a decent size. Now, as what is really the norm now, the zinc plating is a little dull. However, on this one I can't say it's thin. You can't see any of the, I presume it's brass or copper under that sort of colour anyway, in the metal before they are zinc plated. I'm no expert on plating metal, so I could be completely wrong there. There has been some sets, perhaps going back just before the Maker System range come out, a little bit thin, too thin. This is a bit dull. You might call it a satin type finish. Nowhere near as bright or as thick as the Motorized Fairground set, for example, of what, 12 years ago, I think they come out. No, sorry, 22 years ago, 1994, I think the first ones of those, and up till about 2010, I think, in the Marks and Spencer's variety. But anyway, it's good enough. It's not as bright, not as thick as those. For a build, well, it was fiddly. As usual, perhaps for some of the instructions you have to look on a couple of stages to get a clear idea of what you've got to do or to how it's supposed to look. I suppose the only flaw, well, I wouldn't say it's a flaw because you can get by it. I'll try and do it close up, but it's a bit awkward. The undercarriage does retract to an extent. Inside, I don't know, you might be able to see this here. Inside there you've got a narrow strip just in there, connects the front and rear undercarriage. And as you operate the undercarriage, like so, it more or less retracts. So you've got the front there, more or less retracted underneath, and the rear retracted up that way. Now there is a slight snag in that both sides, this bolt here, top of the undercarriage there, the rear undercarriage, clashes with the end of the bolt there, the 19mm bolt there. It's the same on the other side. You can get it past without too much effort, and to be honest, the more I do it, the easier it gets. But I think a washer on the outside of this obtuse angle bracket there, double angle bracket I suppose you might call that, and the same on the other side would sort that out, no problem at all. There are some spares, but I'm going to have a look in a bit to see if there actually is any spare washers to do that. But as I say, you just pull down on it, or push away if you like from this angle, and then you see the undercarriage comes down. Now there's no motor. The motor in this set was provided for the rotor blades by that. It works well though. It is a little bit rocky. It's quite top heavy and a lot of weight either side. Now, going back to finish, as you can see, there isn't much in the way of paint, but what is there is well done, and it's an unusual metallic-y finish. It's quite thick, this blue, but it's almost like opaque a little. You can see through it. It looks like, I don't know if it is, but it looks like it's been painted on top of zinc, given this sort of luminosity, which is sort of accentuated by the fact I'm using quite harsh lighting here today. Now, my least favourite thing about the model regarding aesthetics, the look of it, is the tail rotor. Representing the fan type instead of just a couple of blades, it uses, as you can see there, a 1-inch pulley. Nothing wrong with that. It does stick out a bit like a sore thumb, I suppose, it being yellow. But I suppose the model, being mostly zinc, is quite plain colour wise, and the fact that it's a 1-inch pulley ain't the problem, nor the colour. It's the fact that it sticks out so far. We've got a looking at that, what's that, 23mm bolt, and uses 2 nuts, one either side of this strip to mount it, and as a spacer we use a plastic collar or spacer. The standard one, same size as a Part 59. Brass collar, of course. It sticks out too far, simple really, just sticks out far too far for my liking. It would have been neater if that was closer to this strip here and the tail itself. And I'm thinking, just off the top of my head, mounted in the same way, shorter bolt of course, much shorter, and just use 1 washer, or perhaps 2, just to clear this strip so it can spin freely. Now, as I say, it does stand out a bit more, perhaps because of its colour. Now, let's not kid ourselves, people. This is based on a military helicopter, a Cobra. Perhaps somewhat loosely, but it has a very good representation in all of its parts. Pretty good. Not perfect, of course, but pretty good. Now, if I was going to build this again, you would have to use the 1/4-inch hole space parts to get some of the angles, there's no doubt about that. But I would change the colours. There ain't much you can do about the strips, because vast majority of strips are going to be zinc. But little things like these, I don't know what you're going to call these really, but these sort of almost triangular obtuse plates, I don't know. Nice colour that it is, but let's face it, that's not a military colour, is it? I mean, there's loads of black ones knocking around. The 20 model multi-model set from around 2012 with the like aerial arrow sort of sports car on the front as the main model, which there is a video of actually in the library. They would look better, and again a black pulley for the tail rotor again would make it look a bit better. Of course, greens and stuff, well, there ain't much around in that these days, and certainly not in these parts, but it is a nice looking model. The colours are nice together, but you know, there is military stuff in the world that has been for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, so you know, let's not ignore it, people. It's a fact, you know. But I suppose PC and all that, ooh, don't want to hurt anybody. Well, it's not going to hurt anybody, people. This is not going to hurt anybody. It's a pleasant model, but there are a few little things that I suppose, as always, we could do better, and perhaps changing the colours is one of them. Of course, that's a personal thing, I suppose, but it does look pretty good as it is. Now, one of the great improvements in the Meccano Maker System series of sets is in the instructions, and this is where the black parts are outlined with a white outline. It's not always done. It seems to be only when the black parts are fitted onto black parts, and it helps you to see what's what and how to put things together, more so than having a black blob. Now, this isn't included in the inset parts list per stage or in the parts list themselves at the back of the book, but it is used, or has been used, in the instructions themselves. Now, as you can see, just taking this I presume that's an air intake, or supposed to be. Just taking that as an example. It doesn't fit alongside any black parts, it does fit with black parts. Now, the thing is, in the instructions, the zinc isn't shown as zinc, and I would say that is probably nigh on impossible to do, at least cheaply. But the zinc parts are sort of a darkish grey. Not that dark, but when you've got the black parts up against them, it's still pretty poor. And the black parts still need an outline, which it hasn't got. It does seem to be only where you've got black on black that you've got the white outline. The best example of this with this set is these wheels here. Included in the 5 model construction loader set, either the multi-models or the Meccano maker system is the same, just a different name. One side, I hope you can see this, it is a little awkward with it put together. One side you might just see there, we've got a representation of spokes like an alloy wheel. But on the other side we haven't. The problem with this was that when I come to do that, I could not tell, and maybe this is because of modern lighting, this new low energy, well, let's be honest, rubbish lighting. Well, it didn't help, but it just looked like a black blob. I had to revert to looking at the cover picture on the instruction book, because I'd already thrown the box away by then. So I think we need more of the outlining of the black parts, sort of a standard sort of thing, and it would help in the instruction book parts list and things like that. Now we come to a little problem with the set, although I think it's really the instruction, it's just an error in the instructions. Stage 40, we start with fitting the cockpit onto these 2 narrow fish plates there. As you can see, or you should be able to see, I think, there's an axle right inside there, and on the other side we've got one of these new plastic triangular push-on clip things that do work very well. They sort of grip the axles nicely. Now the instructions state for this stage that the axle in the front there, which does act as a bit of a pivot, at least till you've got it all together, and here should be 40mm, but there's only one in the set. There are 3 50mm. Going through the rest of the instructions showed that only 2 of the 50mm were used in the build, so I think from that we can say it's just a listing error. It should show 50mm. The other thing is, of course, you've got a small rubber grommet on both sides of this axle here, this 50mm. The 40mm wouldn't be long enough. And you're probably thinking, well, without a clip on this 40mm on this side, obviously it's not long enough to fit through to fit one on. That is actually as it's shown in the book, and it's a tight fit. It doesn't, I can't turn it at all, so it does fit well. Perhaps a little ugly with the 50mm, but it does work. Now the fiddliest part of the build all relates to, we'll call it the rotor mount. This is the rotor with the blades, and it's all this assembly around here, just below the blades themselves really. Now, a couple of things. First of all, you will have to use the box end of the spanner to get in. The wider end of the new spanner, which is that end, doesn't help, but in this case you can get away with it. What really doesn't help is the spanner being too slack, or perhaps the nuts being slightly under diameter, perhaps. One or the other. In my case, the spanner would not grip the nuts at all at the box end. So, tip for you here, once you get a good spanner that works, keep it. Secondly, I wasn't in a position to do this myself, not being at home, but if the box end is slanky, just pinch it in a vise or maybe even a pair of pliers. Still though, even with a good box end, it was very awkward to get in some spots underneath here, and trying to get everything aligned. It does, once it's all together, it is quite nicely and neatly done. All the angles are quite nice, using washers as spacers either side there. It all comes together nice. But and I know this is a given really, but when you're building a Meccano model from a set, sometimes, I've said this before, it's best to leave some nuts and bolts loose till the next stage or two to get things in alignment. Now, I didn't do this on this occasion, but it didn't take long to do. First of all, to benefit, or to improve I should say, the access required to fit all this in here, don't fit these on these bolts through here to secure it down until all this is done and tightened, because the front of the cockpit acts as a bit of a hinge, so without those in place you can lift it up and get a bit better access. The other thing is, these obtuse angle brackets here, one each side, those there are fitted, oh I don't know, a couple of stages before we get to this point, perhaps a few more stages than that. They are shown as being in a vertical plane, upright, just there like that. Well, there was no way they were going to fit correctly with these triangular braced girders with them in that position, so I had to slacken them off and lean them back towards the tail rotor a little bit. That was perhaps the most frustrating part of the build really. It was just so awkward to get in, and to be honest, even with the older box end spanner, I don't think it made much difference really. A good box end would have been the most beneficial. It just is a tight space. But again, if you make this model, don't fit these in and tighten them up, these bolts, until you've put all that together, and in doing so you're able to lift the whole assembly there forward like a bonnet if you like, and get at things a little bit easier. But it is a little bit of a struggle, it is tight whatever you do. So folks, there we are then, the model all completed. There is one more thing I've got to mention about the build, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Overall though, the feeling of this model is, until the end result, is quite underwhelming, more so than normally. Now, to me, having had the older stuff with all the parts, or majority of the parts, laid out on, say, a polystyrene tray or a plastic tray if you go back even further, or even a piece of cardboard if you go back further than that. I'm not that old, I don't stretch to the tin boxes, although I'd like some. It's got a lot of things, perhaps, I don't know to put it really, sort of, it misrepresents itself as a set. You've got the box that's far too big, the parts being a lot lighter, even though there's 370 parts in total, sort of goes against it as well. The plus point of the 1/4 inch hole parts means that you can get different angles than you would do with 1/2 inch ones, of course. I still don't like them though. But in this case, it does look the part with the model. I think I've stopped coming out in a rash when using them, so I'm getting more used to them, I suppose. But so you've got the box too big, the plastic bags are always too big. You've got a fair amount of parts, but the weight of them or the lack of them means again you get this more underwhelming and perhaps less value for money feel. I hope that makes sense. However, once it's together, it somehow feels heavier. It's sort of more solid, more robust, more value for money. It's still a bit expensive, I think, at the £50. Now, it's probably not from putting the set together point of view for the makers, but in your pocket, after you've bought it, it still feels a bit too pricey. There is no motor, of course, but it does have a few features. It's a nice size, and once this has been displayed, it will be going up on the ceiling to add to the rest in the Meccano air show, amongst a few others, of course, which will come in time, and some which haven't been put up yet. So features then, you've already seen the blades rotate, and there's also folding blades. The blades themselves held on with a 9.5mm belt, one each side with a nylock nut. And what you do, I haven't done it myself, but you leave a little bit more play in the axle, allows you to lift up these two L-shaped brackets here, joined with a 1/2 inch 3L strip across the middle, the bolts of which locate into the blades themselves. So when you pull it up, you are, to an extent, able to fold the blades. So that's one feature, We've got the rotating rotor, of course, another feature. The tail rotor spins. Be nice, I suppose, if that rotated off the main rotor, but of course more complications there. And internally there ain't much room left, to be honest. We've got the undercarriage, which retracts and lowers to an extent, but we've also got this little winch with a nice little traditional black hook. Now this is probably the, I can't say it's worse because it's so easy to get round, but there's an error in the instructions, or something missing, probably more like. Now the cylinder is formed by bending what is a flat plate round, therefore underneath there's a slot. It's not sealed in any way, it's not soldered, welded, glued, it's just folded over, formed to make a cylinder. That slot is a possible route for the string to come through, and to guess that's what's probably meant from the instructions, but it's very poor. In fact, I've got the instruction book here. It doesn't really show you, but it is the last stage, if I can remember correctly. Yes. So we can get this in focus and not too glary. There you are. You tie the cord onto the rubber grommet, put it on, wrap it round, and it doesn't actually show you there where the string is supposed to come out of. If you look on the front cover, it just says, it just looks like from below. Now you could try the slot underneath, but it's far too tight and will grab the cord. You could also try, and I suppose this would probably work, but it might get a bit messy. There's enough play in the winch to put it through between the pulley and the cylinder. In the end, as you can see, I'll put it through the side, but it doesn't show you that. Now, it's a bit awkward to do because there's no gearing, of course, so we're working with basically the size of the axle, so it's a bit hesitant. And as you can see, I'll just hopefully try and pull it out. It's a bit stiff because some idiot decided to use the rechargeable drill on it to wind it up, and it worked fine, but it did it a bit tight. So as you can see, it comes out, and there we go, and it does wind back in. So let's do it with the drill. Let's try and get it on there, a bit tighter than that. I don't have it tight, and try and there we go. So folks, now it's built, it's a decent set, apart from the little niggles, of course. No real problems. Fiddly at the rotor mount, a little bit of guesswork required occasionally, which entails looking on a few instructions perhaps. A little bit of adjustment of angles to get things to sit a little bit better, so you may not want to tighten up all the bolts too tightly until you've gone past that stage, a couple of stages on, which really is the norm with any set, really, especially where perhaps slightly more unusual angles are concerned. Overall then, value for money, I still think it's a little bit expensive at 50 quid. If there was a motor, I could see it. There's no way a standard 3-stroke 6-volt motor is going to fit inside there, not without some alterations. And it is possible, I would think, but certainly no room for the batteries in the standard battery box, even with only 2. It's a neat looking model. It has several features. Okay, some of them are not that enthralling, are they? And they're not very complicated, but at least it's a good effort. It does have more play value, even though they're only basic features. So more play value, reasonable build, couple of little niggles. Overall, 40 quid, yes. 50 quid, still a little bit too much, I think. But it does not help itself, really. I don't think really there is a problem. It just feels like there's a problem, if that makes sense. Overall, it's a good model. Good features, although basic. And very good looking, I think. Maybe some of you don't think that, but I think it's got a decent representation. Anyway, folks, that's it for now. I've probably gone on far too long, as usual. It's sort of a given now, isn't it? So I'll crank up the rotor and I'll see you again. Bye, folks.